In this lesson, we're going to look at solving linear equations. So in my first example here, I've got the equation x plus 5 equals 9. Now, when we solve for an unknown value, we're trying to isolate for one of the variable. So in this example, we're trying to solve for 1x. So what I ask myself is, well, what numbers are on the side of the equation with x, and how are they connected? And so I can see that this 5 is on the left-hand side of the equation with x, and it is connected with a plus sign. And so what we want to do is we want to do the opposite of what it is to add 5. This is called an inverse operation. It undoes it. And so the opposite of adding 5 is that we want to subtract 5. And now whatever we do to one side of the equation, we must do to the other. And so if I take the plus 5 and subtract 5, that now makes a 0, and I'm just left with an x on the left. And on the right-hand side, 9 subtract 5 is 4. So x is 4. And we could check our answer by seeing if we plug in x equals 4, do we get 9? And we can see that we do. So therefore, x equals 4 must be the right answer. Looking at our next example, we want to solve for the unknown value of a here. So we have 3 times a is equal to 21. So again, I want to isolate for one of the a's. And so I have this 3 right here. And this 3 is connected with a multiplication sign. And so the opposite of multiplying is to divide. So since that is a multiply by 3, I'm going to divide each side by 3. On the left-hand side, 3 divided by 3 is just going to be a 1. And we don't normally write the 1 in front of a variable. We can just assume that it's a 1 there. And on the right-hand side, 21 divided by 3 is 7. And again, if we wanted to check our answer, 3 times 7 does equal 21. Getting into a bit more complicated examples now. We have 4 times b plus 5 is equal to 27. And so you now have two numbers on the left-hand side that are attached to the b. And well, which one do we want to get rid of first? And so I'm going to do this quickly, and then I'm going to show you something that you can fall back on if you're just learning this process. So what I want to do for this first one is I want to subtract the 5 from each side. And that's going to leave me with 4 times b is going to be on the right-hand side. I'm going to be left with 27 subtract 5, which is 22. Now I've got 4 times b, so I'm going to divide each side by 4. On the left-hand side, I'm going to just get a b, and on the right-hand side, I'm going to get 22 over 4, and you could reduce fractions or use your calculator, and you will get 5.5. Another strategy that you can use to solve is take a number and substitute it in for b. So I'm going to take the number 13 just because it stands out. So this is going to be 4 times 13 plus 5, and that's equal to 27. Now, if you were going to evaluate this with order of operations, in step 1, you would take the 13 and you would multiply it by 4. Then you would take that result, and afterwards you would add 5, and that would give you your answer on the left-hand side. Well, in order to solve this now, you want to reverse this process. So the opposite of adding 5 is to subtract 5, and the opposite of multiplying by 4 is to divide by 4. And if we then look, that is exactly what I did up above. The first thing I did was I subtracted 5 to give me 4b was equal to 22. And then I divided each side by 4, and I achieved the answer of 5.5. This strategy will work, and it will help you gain confidence in solving these linear equations. So looking at the next one, I've got 7 subtract 5r is equal to 13. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this 7. It's attached, it's a plus 7, so I'm going to subtract 7 from each side. On the left-hand side, I'll now be left with minus 5r, and then 13 take away 7 is going to be 6. I then want to get rid of this negative 5r, this negative 5 attached to r, so I'm going to divide because it's attached by multiplication, and then I will get r is equal to, and on the right-hand side, 6 divided by 5 is 1.2, and a positive divided by a negative is a negative. And so my value of r is negative 6 over 5, or negative 1.2. But if I use my strategy that we used in the last example, let's take a random value of r and we will plug it in. So what would I do if I wanted to evaluate this left-hand side? So step 1 would be that I would take the 21 and I would multiply it by a negative 5. And then after that, I would add 7. So now I'm just going to reverse those. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 7, and then I'm going to, instead of multiplying by negative 5, I'm going to divide by negative 5. And if we subtract 7 from both sides, that is what we did above, and then we divided by negative 5, right? Whatever we do to one side, we do to the other, and we achieved our answer of negative 1.2. One last example here. We've got 3x plus 5, all divided by 4 is equal to 8. So I'm just going to write this out. 3x plus 5, all divided by 4 is equal to 8. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this 4 in the denominator. And if it's in the denominator of a fraction, that means that it's dividing. So I need to multiply each side by 4. Those 4s are going to divide to 1. And so on the left-hand side, I'm left with 3x plus 5 is equal to 32. This is now familiar to an example on the previous. So I'm going to subtract 5 from each side. I'm going to get 3x is equal to 32 take away 5 is 27. And I'll divide by 3 and get my answer of 9. But just to show you the writing out the steps and then reversing them, again, if we were to take the 3x plus 5 all over 4, again, take some random number just that really stands out. And if you were going to evaluate this, what would be the first thing you would do? Well, the first thing you would do is you would take that 29 and you would multiply it by 3. Then, after that, you would then add 5. And then finally, you would then take and divide all of that by 4. And so reversing these steps in order to solve, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the opposite of divide by 4, which was multiply by 4. And if we scroll up, the first thing I did was multiply by 4. Then next, in order to reverse and add 5, we are going to subtract 5. And you can see that I did subtract 5 from each side of the equation. And then finally, the opposite or the inverse of multiplying by 3 is to divide by 3. And we can see that I divided in the last step by 3.